Hello, welcome to day 17. Sorry, I had to double check. That is right. Day 17. We are going to paint this little cardinal in a kind of snowy tree. I will say I didn't add, at the end I think I was going to add some bleed-proof white splatters to make it look like it's actively snowing. I haven't done any of my highlights, so we'll be adding those there at the end. And I might change things up a little bit. When I painted this the first time, I didn't avoid the bird, the cardinal. I just painted the whole background and then painted over it. And because of that, even though it's kind of a light background, you can see some of the green through my bird, which is not a big deal. It just depends on how you want to paint yours. In the reference photo, I was using the edge of the bird over here is much softer and kind of more highlighted, and that's hard to do with the background. But we could kind of sketch out where the bird's going to go and avoid him when we do the background, which would give us a little more freedom with that part of it. So that's kind of up to you, whether you want to avoid the bird or not. I am not going to use masking fluid because I am using the more soft cottony paper. And the masking fluid doesn't always do very well, and I don't want to risk ripping my paper. So we're just going to have to avoid that area if we want to go that way. So let me tape down my paper because for the background it is wet on wet. And so taping it down is helpful. I didn't tape it down the first time. I never seem to when I'm just playing around with some ideas. So it can be done, but it is harder because you have to hold your paper in place. So again, if you want to tape it down, you can. If you don't want to, you can certainly get by without taping it down. It just makes it pop up a little bit more than it does when taped. And it's a little bit harder because you have to make sure you're holding it in place when you are painting. But if you like the rough edges, that can be done by not taping. You can also get that effect if you're painting like regularly in full size. You can paint on a block and then you can paint all the way to the edges because the paper is attached on all four sides. But for these little tiny bits, we can't do that. Okay, so the first thing we're gonna do on this is do just a really rough sketch of where we want our branches to go. And we can make adjustments to those when we paint the final thing. I'm just getting a rough idea. It helps place where the bird is going to go as well. Typically, you wouldn't want to put the bird right in the middle, but there aren't a whole lot of other places to put him. So with this tiny piece and making him so big, if we wanted to make him smaller, we could put him off to the side, but the reference photo actually has him kind of in the middle anyway. And I didn't actually sketch my cardinal the first time I painted this, but since we're going to try to avoid him, I am going to paint or do just a little sketch so that we know what areas to avoid. See, in this one, actually, I painted him a little too low. And now his feathers don't quite fit as well as I would like them to. So I'm just going to have to make him a bit smaller so his feathers fit in a little better. And I'm going to lighten up this line a bit before I actually start painting, because I don't want to have anything that won't be covered with the paint getting in the way there. Okay, and this is literally just a really rough sketch. I didn't put any of the details in there, just the basic shapes. And that should just help because we can extend it a little bit when we're painting it, but we want to make sure that we have all of the main area here covered. Okay, So there that is. Okay. So to paint this background, we're going to wet the whole area, avoiding the bird. It's okay if you kind of paint where the branches are. We can go over that. I did this. I painted them on top. I used a little brown and then I added some bleed-proof white to lighten up the branches. But we can definitely make adjustments to that as we go, and the branches can be darker. So get some water on your brush. I'm using a bigger brush just to cover more of the area faster. Just be very careful when you get over to the sketch area. If you go over the sketch, your paint will go in that area. It's going to go anywhere where there is water. So if you wet the area above the sketch, then your bird area will be covered with the paint. So just something to be aware of. Try to avoid it if you can. Unless, like I said, you wanted to go and just paint over it, which you can do as well. If you're doing that, though, I would kind of just paint the whole thing. Otherwise, you're going to have darker edges. So either avoid the whole bird or paint over the whole bird. Okay, I'm going to move this out of the way for a minute. And we are just going to take some Perylene green and I'm just going to drop it in on this wet background in random bits. I'm not really paying too much attention. I'm just dropping it in there. I will say that in the picture it is darker on one side of the bird, and then it kind of fizzes out a little bit, so it's not as dark on this side. Maybe there's like a thicker area of trees on the one side. You don't have to do it that way. You can make your whole background the same color, but if you want to, you can go in that same general idea as well. And we're just not filling the whole area, just dropping in some color and spreading it out a bit. I would go back in, drop in some darker areas here and there. The original photo has more of a bokeh type background, which it might be fun to explore some other time, but that would be a bit more time consuming. And trying to keep this into a shorter tutorial, I didn't want to add in too much more of that. So we'll stick with just this random kind of blurry type thing. And you can lift out some color with a wet brush. It's just a really messy background that we're going to look like a kind of a moody, snowy type day. All right, just little tiny touches of slight darker areas over here, but like I said, in general, it's lighter on this side of the picture, so I'm not adding as much there. And when we do our bird, we can just go to the edges with stuff. Another thing we can do, which I did a little bit of in this one, is adding in some bleed-proof white in our sky, like a blurry kind of amount. So we're just going to take it and drop it in to the wet area, just in some spots here. Let it bleed out. I think it kind of gives the impression of snow a bit, and we'll drop in some splatters later to look like snow as well. So this is just more to add some variation into the background. Okay, so now we're just going to let that dry completely before we work on our branch and our cardinal. Softening that up a little bit. Okay, so go ahead and pause your video. let it dry completely. If you have a heated craft tool and want to speed up the drying process, you can. I typically don't use that. I like to let it air dry naturally as much as possible. So I'm just going to let mine dry, and I will come back when we're ready to move on. All right, it is not fully dry, but I think it is dry enough that we can begin to at least sketch in our branches and then get started on our bird. I'm going to use my round 4 for the branches, at least for the thicker ones. Then I will swap to my thinner liner brush for the finer branches. Just to kind of show again, I'll stick this here so we can at least kind of see a bit of a reference. I'm going to use some sepia and burnt sienna, also a little bit of this gray. The branches in the reference photo are kind of like birch, so they're more white, which we can add some bleed-proof white to kind of help get that look. But for now, I just wanted to get the branches in here. I'm going to avoid the bird again. Can add some little knots. Like, don't make it too straight. We want it to wobble a bit, like a branch would. Go up and then down a bit. Okay. And then I'm gonna take, we got several branches that branch off over here. I actually don't even have to switch to my liner brush. I'm just lifting my brush to where I'm kind of just using the tip of it to get a nice fine point, which is a good thing to practice learning how to do. It's a good skill to have. Okay, and then I'm going to add just a teeny tiny little branch coming out this way. They're all coming from here. You want it to be thicker at the base where the branch comes out, and it gets thinner as it gets further away. That's how branches are typically in real life. So, oh, you know what? I forgot. I'm actually going to go through here because we're going to see his feet sitting on the branch, but the actual bird's body does not cover the tree branch. I had a little momentary whoops. But there we go. We can lighten that up a bit if needed here in a bit. I am going to add a few little branches coming this way. You can put your branches wherever fits best in your picture. You don't have to do them in the same exact spot that I am doing. I'm going to add a little tiny node type thing there. And I'm gonna add another, you know what? I was gonna add another branch because see, actually no, I didn't even add that in here. I have some below and behind it, and these ones are actually, the ones that are behind need to be much lighter in color, and it might have even worked to put them in while our background was drying, because then they would have bled out a little bit more. But these branches are in the background. They kind of blend in a bit, and they're much lighter in color. You don't have to include them if you don't want to, but it gives a little something in the background there. Even this is a nice light one. that actually comes up behind our bird here. Okay. And that's not as thick at the bottom as it should be. There we go. Okay. I am gonna leave that, I think, for now. Sorry, let me just add a little. We'll come and add details of like color variations and stuff to our branches as we go. And actually, there's one I forgot. See, I didn't include that one behind there, but I did include this one up front that is more detailed. And it's got some little thicker areas on it. Okay. And so now we're going to move on to the Cardinal. We're going to use this cadmium red. I'm going to do a lighter value wash first, and then we'll touch in some brighter bits afterwards. And so the Cardinal has a nice kind of chunky belly. Fill in that whole space there. And then I'm going to get a little bit of darker areas right here in the middle, because he's a lot more red and detailed in the center here. I'm going to get some more of that soft wash, and I'm just going to do a few little pointy bits. This is the small part of the tail. The rest of the tail is actually going to be quite darker than that. And then I'm just going to add some more bright bits right there. And then we're going to do the head as well. Nice light wash. I'm going to kind of avoid the area that I want to be black, but since it's going to be darker, it's okay if you go into that area a bit. Since it'll be darker than the red, it's not as important to avoid. I get a little bit darker red. I'm just going to touch right up here. I want it to blend out, but it's definitely darker along the areas there. And we'll add some more details and darker areas after it's dried. And then the beak is probably more of an orangish color, but it looks the same color as his body, just like a lighter red. And actually for this, you may want to use your liner brush because it's a small area. We'll have a little more control if we use a liner. We'll get some of that red. And just in here in the middle, I'm gonna fill in a bit of a pointy area. Not gonna go all the way over. That is gonna be the black area around his face. And some of this will need some highlights later, but that just gives us a little bit to start with. Okay. And then if we want, we can also do the tail feathers, which are actually a darker muted red, using that Perylene green mixed with the cadmium red. We might use a little bit of black for some shadows in those tail feathers in a bit, but for now we're just doing this little shape. There we go. All right, we're gonna let his body dry more before we do the black, because I don't want the black to blend in to our red feathers. And same with his feet. While we're waiting for that to dry though, if we want, so that we don't have to sit around, we can use some of the bleed-proof white and some clean water. And we can lighten up some of these branches a bit. I'm getting a bleed-proof white wet, tapping a little bit of it off right here on my towel. And then I'm gonna just go over, that was a bit too much that I dabbed off. Go over some of these branches and lighten them up just a bit. Some might need more lightening than others. And I'm kind of doing it in a rough, kind of sketchy way, because we can leave some of that darker color for the shadow and just darker patches that are on the leaf. Just be very careful not to get too much into that red of the bird. Keep getting a little more bleed-proof white, tapping. So we want it to be blended in. We don't want it to look like a highlight necessarily, because the branches aren't like shiny. And too much might give the wrong look. I'm gonna go ahead and add a little bit to this background branch. And this one here, just all along all of them. And we can go through and add some shadows on our branches too after we've let most of this, the white area, dry. But adding that bleed-proof white does lighten up the branches and give it some more of that texture that we want. Okay. I will put that away for now. Okay, my red area is pretty dry, so I'm going to carefully mix up a black or a really dark gray using the Sepia and the Perylene, not Perylene, my soda light. Get a nice, almost black color. If you have a black, you can use a black. I don't want you to feel like you have to use the colors I am using. And then we're just going to fill in that space between the beak and the other feathers. It's got an interesting little shape here. We want a little bit underneath here. The eye will be over here too, which we'll add in a bit. And then there's just a tiny little bit that separates the beak. Okay, and we're gonna let that dry for a minute. All right, oops, sorry about that. I had a phone call, so I had to pause this video. And things may have shifted when I put it back on there, so I apologize if it looks a little funny. Let's go ahead and finish touching up details on our Cardinal and our stem, everything's dry now. Anything we were waiting on has dried. So I'm going to get a little bit more of the cadmium red ready. We got to add his feet here in a minute. I can say his because this is a boy. The red Cardinal. We're going to make it, add some brighter red here around his face. Definitely darker there. And then we can kind of add some little, I guess, kind of like scribbles, splotches of some darker color to kind of give the impression of the feathers. All along the body there. It's darker in the middle than on the edges. And then there's a bit here. This actually looks like the beginning of some feathers here. Darken them up a little. The tail feathers. And then, but yeah, a lot of this up here stays that nice light color. And then for our beak, it is a bit darker on the bottom half here. And that top half stays a little whiter. And then we can use some of this gray to just darken up a little bit. Actually, I'm going to use this red. Is that in my video still? Yes. Okay. So the red that I had mixed previously with the green, we're just going to touch up some more here. There's some darker areas. And then there are some areas where there's white, which we can use with a bleed proof white or a pen to kind of lighten those up here in a minute. Let's use some of this grayish brown, maybe even some of this brown down here, which is Sepia, mixed with the burnt sienna. But then we also have the gray, and we're just going to do some little dark areas where his feet would sit. And then we're just going to kind of pull some of that down to look like his little feet. Look at that. And then we can also use some of this dark color to just add some shadow along some of these branches, just for a little bit more detail. Some of them have little bits that stick out. And there's just some darker areas to just add some texture. And then we can even take some more of the bleed proof white, add a little more of the white mix in here. But overall, these are just adding some finer last minute details, and they're not as important. It just depends on how much detail you want to have in your painting, but you can tell just by looking at this painting as is that it's a cardinal on a tree. And so that is all you really need to do. The more details we do, the more it adds time to our painting. But it also can give us, a little more information. So it just depends on the look that you are going for. But for the purposes of this small, quick little section of doing some little mini tutorials, I think this is pretty good overall. I will grab some bleed proof white real quick, just to do one little hint of a reflection in an eye. We just need a very, very small bit right in there, barely touch. Sorry, apparently it's not wet enough. I'm afraid of putting too much. I don't want a big white spot. Oh, sorry, my dog bumped my camera mount as she came to sit, but there we go. Just a really small light reflection there. And then we will do just a tiny bit right, really, really thin along here. Just to kind of separate those tail feathers a bit. And then if your bird got a little too dark and you wanted to add some shadows, you can add a little bit of the white highlights on the sides here. But overall, I think they look pretty good. I will say my cardinal's head is a little big for his body. His body should definitely be much bigger and the head smaller, but that's okay. But there's our little cardinal. And oh, I almost forgot. If you want to add snow at the end, you can use your bleed proof white and you can get it wet, get some nice white bleed proof white paint on your brush, tap it in your water, and then splatter some on if you want it to look like it's actively snowing. You don't have control over where it goes. Be careful if you have an iPad nearby, or phone, paint palette. I have accidentally gotten lots of white bits in my paint before doing this, but it does add a little something at the end to make it look like a nice snowy day. So there that is. That's the final touches that I almost forgot we were gonna do. And so then when that is done, now your painting can be called done if you choose to add those. And again, if you don't want the if you don't have the bleed proof white, you can use like a white gel pen to do the same kind of thing. You'll just have to dot it in there and just be careful not to make it too patterned and to adjust the sizes of your things. But there's our two different paintings. I kind of like the snow. It adds a little something. It looks really nice. And thank you for painting with me. I hope you had a good time. Let me know if you have any questions or concerns or anything like that. And I will see you guys tomorrow for day 18. All right. Thanks, y'all. Bye.